Hello everyone, what's up? Today I will be talking about my favorite part of design, which is ideation. To me, it's like the best feeling to being faced with a difficult problem to solve and coming up with loads of different solutions. That's when I feel the most creative as a designer, and it's just the most fun for me. So today I want to share with you when ideation is the most effective within the product design process. I will talk to you about how designers think differently from other people potentially and why their strategies are effective in generating ideas. I will share with you how to overcome creative blocks and how to turn basic ideas into great ideas potentially, or at least good ideas, and also what the right mindset is for designers before they start creative thinking. So stick around and let's go. This is the outline of today's video. So I will be talking about the design thinking in an overview. I will talk about ideation specifically, how to define a problem, and how to get into the right mindset to generate ideas. And then I will provide 3 ideation tools. First is to think like a designer does. Then I will talk about how to overcome ideation blocks and how to evolve basic ideas into good ones. All right, let's talk about design thinking and how design thinking fits into the product design process. So design thinking in itself is like a strategy that is supposed to offer solutions for a problem in a creative, innovative way. And it also makes sure to consider the user. So it's user centric and it offers viable solutions for the business. And it also is technologically feasible in the first place, so that all the ideas that we come up with during the design thinking process can actually be implemented in real life and solve real problems that are helpful and add value to a user, so a business can profit from it. And design thinking, I would say, is most prevalent within the first 3 stages of the general design process, product design process. So within the research, ideation, and the concept phase, but also for detailing and the production, you can still apply design thinking principles, even though that becomes much more about the technical details. The first steps and the first most important things we have to do when we want to use design thinking is to identify a problem and to understand our user so we can actually come up with valuable solutions. And secondly, we will develop ideas and we'd have to test them to make sure that they actually do what we want them to do and that they provide the solution in the way that we expect it to happen. The first stage of the process is the research process. So before we can even start thinking about ideas, we have to make sure that we understand the user correctly and that we have a clear understanding about the problem. In a day-to-day as a designer, usually the client already has an existing product, right? The first things you have to do within your research is to understand how the existing product works. So that also means like just the mechanics of it. You can start looking into different competitors. How do they things differently? Why is it better or worse than the solution at hand? And also just take a look at the market in general. How does it look like? Is it very competitive? What makes a product be perceived as a premium product with high quality and a product with low quality? User wise, we have to look into who the user is, how do they use the product actually, and where do we identify existing problems that the user potentially has. Only once we have a clear understanding of the user and the problem, we move on to the next stage. Part of the product analysis is to understand the product, right? So what usually happens is that the client comes to a design agency with an existing product. So they already have a product on the market that sells, and they ask of you to make it the next iteration so it's more contemporary, update the design language, or they understand that there are existing problems within the product and they want us to solve them, help them solve it. So in order to do that properly, you really have to dig down into the product. Ideally, you get a sample of the product, you are allowed to disassemble and understand all the functions, how the mechanics work, how things are connected, where problems are within the mechanics, or how you can even streamline the entire machine. And it's not like we will do a complete technical redesign, but you have to at least get to a level where you understand how things work to such a degree that it helps you coming up with ideas and solutions to the identified problem. Usually this also involves going really back into the fundamentals of physics, like are we using the right principles for applying a rotation, or can we look at competitors and see that they do things with different mechanisms that are not protected by patent, so we can also implement them or improve on them. Another part of the product analysis is the competitor and market analysis. What I like to do is like build this matrix or axis system with different attributes, left and right, top and bottom, and then to place the different competitors and group them, cluster them to see where we have gaps and where are potential opportunities for our client to grow into and establish like a stronger presence. But also you can use this to compare them aesthetically and functionally, which are products with high functionality or very simple and which look more traditional or more modern. By choosing different words for these scales, you can really make this a interesting, useful tool to compare the marketscape. And for the user, usually you look into who the user is, right? What do they do? What are their characteristics? What are their interests? Why do they use the product? How do they use it? What are other relevant factors within their lives that potentially play into the use of the product or help us understand how to improve the product first, right? Because at the beginning we stated design thinking is user centered, right? So here we really have to make sure that we capture the essence of the user so we know that our ideas will be of value. So you can communicate them well to your client. Maybe they already have existing names for the user groups that they have that buy that product. And also to understand potential problems, you can always do the research, go into subreddits, try to figure out if people are talking about products, if they complain, what are problems, go to Amazon, look at the bad or 3-star reviews to see what they like about the product, but what are also things that they feel could be better. So this is really like a valuable source. So now we have done the initial research, right? So we have a clear understanding of the problem. Is it a functional problem? Is it a usability problem? Is it a marketing problem or a cost problem? So different problems require different solutions and also allow us to come up with different ideas. So if there's no problem at all, that might leave us with coming up with ideas that are a little bit redundant, that they don't really add value anymore. They just are purely aesthetic, and we want to avoid designing things just for the appearance. But when we redesigning a product anyways, then we can also try to improve it on other levels as well, right? That can be usability. Are the buttons arranged in such a way that the user can actually read them, understand them well? Are the icons still up to date? Or can we think of different manufacturing techniques that reduce costs of the production or that make assembly easier, right? There's so many different things about a product that we can still consider when working with the product, even if the client comes to us and not stating a clear problem that they have, right? They just expect the next iteration, but we identify a problem either way to make sure that we make a better product than it was before. All right, now let's talk about the mindset. So I did look into some scientific papers to see what the science on this is, and I state some of the sources here, so you can still check them out if you want. But what the science basically says is that stress, fatigue, and pressure can be ideation retardants, right? So negative emotions can also negatively impact the creative flow of ideas, and positive emotions can do the opposite, help you come up with better and more creative ideas. But the key point of the paper that I was reading was about that it's not enough that you're in a happy mood or in a positive mood, but also in an active mood. And they say that happiness is a good mood to be in because it's positive and active, right? That you get in a state of engagement and activity and it's positive overall. That is the most beneficial state to come up with creative ideas. Other papers also state that it's important to warm up to be more creative. So maybe you want to put on your favorite music and have fun with it, right? To get into the right mood, to really get into the flow also of things. And what science also shows is that building mindfulness habits can actively increase the likelihood of creative output during the ideation, right? So that means maybe you want to meditate, and that will open your mind in such a way that you can come up with more creative ideas and also more easily enter the flow state, right? Which is achieved when the challenge at hand is at the exact level for you that you can face it, but you're challenged by it. This is the moment where everything vanishes around you, time escapes, right? Like the seconds or hours pass within minutes in your perception because you're so entrenched in the ideation flow in the sketching, in the process. So actively seek those moments by also making sure your environment fits the ideation process. Try to avoid distractions and really allow yourself the space to ideate and get into the zone. One of the first and major principles of ideation is to get out as many ideas as possible within a fixed time frame. Half an hour, maybe two, to get out as many ideas as possible, and don't judge them in this stage. We save that judgment for later. At the beginning, it's all about quantity. You want to just get out all the ideas, and at a later stage, evaluate them on their viability, novelty, originality, creativity, functionality, and all these aspects. So the general techniques in ideation are brainstorming, right, as a group, but you can also do brainstorming by yourself. Just write things down, all the ideas, what's in your head, put them on paper. Thumbnail sketching, obviously, for designers is really helpful in terms of shape, proportion, size, mind mapping, create networks of associations that are related, that help you see also the broader context of the product, the user, and how all the things interact with each other. And what I find to be really helpful is to just talk about the problem with other people. And often they just have a completely different perspective on the same topic as you have, and that can broaden your understanding of the issue. Now I will be talking about the 3 ideation tools, right? The first tool is to think like a designer does. So, I mean, that feels obvious. If we consider ourselves designers, then we also think like designers, right? But there is indeed some research that also suggests that designers do think differently than other people when problem solving, because they are trained in doing exactly that, trying to come up with creative ideas for problems that have a lot of uncertainties, that require a lot of creativity and originality, and that are potentially challenging. And because we as designers have to do that on a daily basis, we are trained, we develop techniques, and also wired our brain in such a way that it more easily can use shortcuts that lead to more ideas faster and potentially help us create more original ideas and connect different domains. So how do designers think in general? Designers are willing to break down and reassemble things in new ways, right? So other people might look at a product and see it as a whole and try to also understand the problem by keeping the whole intact. What designers tend to do is to disassemble elements, reassemble them in different ways, and see how that changes the function. Does it improve? Does it help? And yeah, just this disassembly and deconstruction of things, and does often lead to new and interesting approaches toward the same object. Also, designers consider the context, the user, and other intangibles. So in technical thinking, you are more likely to really pinpoint the functionalities, the technicalities of a product. But we as designers are trained to also consider the context of use. Where is it being used? The weather, the temperature, humidity. Who is using it? Are they trained to use it? Have they ever used it before? What mood are they in when they use it? What mood do we want them to be in when they stop using it? Intangible things that we as designers try to consider and incorporate within the ideation. If you don't do that already, try to make it a habit. Take into account all these intangibles. A classic thing for designers is to rely on externalized thinking, which is sketches and diagrams. That the science says that it helps to reduce the mental load because you put your thoughts onto the paper. You have a record of your ideas and your thinking, so you can always refer back to it without it taking up mental space within your brain. And putting all these things on paper next to each other also allows you to more easily connect things with each other and come up with new approaches to an already stated idea. So it's this really working visually helps. And then science says that designers rely on cognitive shortcuts. So what worked once might work again. That means that if you worked in a project and it was helpful to take things apart and have them being 2 pieces rather than 1 big piece, because manufacturing wise it was much more easy. If you have 2 symmetric pieces rather than 1 huge thing, it was maybe cheaper. So maybe you can take that same principle and apply it to the current existing problem you have. And because you already thought about it before, you can quickly assess whether or not this is a relevant method at the stage. The last thing that characterizes the thinking of a designer is that designers explore several ideas and actively seek also the non-obvious solutions, right? So they don't just make one idea and then develop that idea to a stage that makes it like almost finished and done, but they create many different ideas and develop them also in parallel to see which one turns out to be the best. And after the initial, let's say, low-hanging fruit ideas have been churned out, they actively seek non-obvious solutions. What haven't I tried at all, or what haven't I seen before being done, or what shape is not typical for this kind of thing, and what does it potentially say semantically, what does it imply emotionally for the user if I change the perspective. In ideation, try to think like a designer if you don't already do. Be willing to tear things apart, put them back together in different ways, and train yourself so you can more easily rely on the brain circuits that you have built during the process. Now we'll be talking about how to overcome ideation blocks and creative thinking blocks. So the first and most important advice I can give is to take a break and step away from the problem. Because what usually happens is that you get stuck, your brain is so occupied with the problem that you get fixated and you cannot move on any further. So if you take a break, try to distract yourself with other things, maybe play a game, talk to somebody about something completely unrelated that helps your brain unconsciously, subconsciously keep working in the background, but also have your distance. So when you're coming back to the problem, you have a fresh eye and you see things more clearly than you did before. And potentially your brain did keep working. So it already evolved some ideas about the problems that you were facing during the fixation. Another helpful tool is to switch it up, and this could be anything really. So you could just switch the location where you ideate, and that potentially leads to new impressions, new mood. You can switch the medium. If you use the pencil, maybe try use markers, or maybe writing or digital, right? So just changing the medium also gives you new tools in your hands to come up with new ideas. And also you can switch up the thinking mode, right? Maybe you try to be really divergent. You feel like you're in a block. So then just go into an analytical. Take the ideas that you already have, try to group them and cluster them. And then potentially you already find by doing that, your brain gets some release in the creative thinking part. And now you have a new approach and additional free mental space to go back to divergent ideation creative thinking. Try to think about other domains that solve similar problems. So if you're stuck and you feel like this is the problem that's probably have been solved in other domains, where could things have been similarly? Where is the function in general the same, but it's completely different field or domain of use? Maybe do you have something, you work on a problem in the medical sector where you have to, I don't know, transport liquids from one point to the other in a very specific way, very controlled. And then you maybe want to look at painting industry and how do they use like spray painters, how do they transport their color? Or oil refineries, how do they like push like these huge amounts of fluid through the pipes? Is there a correlation that you can use? Is there technologies that you can apply? Principles that make sense? But by changing the domain overall, you also try to loosen up your fixation on the problem that blocks you. Then recombining ideas, I mean, that's the general principle I already discussed in the previous section. It also helps with the grouping, right? But if you feel stuck and not come up with new ideas, then look at what you already have. You probably already have like a huge amount of ideas, and just take individual aspects of some of these ideas and recombine them into new ideas. So potentially, even if you just have 10 ideas, you should in theory be able to combine these 10 ideas in like almost infinite numbers of ways, right? Just taking this part of idea 1, the second part of idea 2, the third part of idea 3, and recombining them should give you endless amounts of ideas, unlimited ideas unlocked. And if that doesn't help, so if you feel like overall you're blocked, what sometimes helps me is to focus in and zoom into a single problem area, right? So maybe it's difficult to solve everything at once. So maybe I just look at the handle as itself, and then that frees up some space and I can just think about handles, 20 different handles. And once I have those handles, they also inform again the ideas that I might have for the entire thing, the entire machine, because different handles have different implications for the housing, right? So by going back and forth between like the overall structure and focused points of attention, I can also avoid being fixated on the problem and not moving forward. And another strategy is the oblique strategies. It's a website or an app you can use. And what it basically does is by giving you these creative wisdom words, it just helps you look at things in a different perspective. So let me just look one up. So for example, it says only one element of each kind. Maybe it's completely unrelated to your product, but that's also what makes it so strong, because it doesn't consider your product. It's just like random sentences, but potentially they trigger something in you at this moment that help you, you're right, I can just consider one element of each kind instead of making, I don't know, it being 5 elements. I can consider it as a block, and that makes things much more easy. So yeah, that's just a secret little hint that you can use. And now I want to talk about how to turn basic ideas into good ideas. So basically how I use that is I question the ideas that I have to see if they fulfill the requirements to be a good idea. It's not like a super conscious process, it's more like iterative. And I see an idea is not there yet, I try to work on it more to get there, right? So I wonder if my idea really solves a problem, or does it solve a real problem? Does it actually add value, or is it just a repackaged thing of the same object that we have? So does it actually improve on what we have? Then I also wonder if there's something surprising about it. Is there something new about the object that wasn't there before that catches the interest and the attention of the user, also of the manufacturer? These things are really nice because during the ideation they come up, and when you bring it up to the client in a presentation, they are surprised as well. Oh wow, that's a really cool idea, that's a cool aspect. Obviously that not always works. Sometimes it's just new, but they understand it to be useless. But then you might have misunderstood the function, or the client might also just have misunderstood the user. So I think it at least opens up discussions, right? Then does the idea resolve a tension? I think this one is interesting. Usually a product solves a major tension, right? You want to have, what is it? A phone, right? You want it to be as small as possible to fit in your pocket that you can carry with you, but you want it to be as big as possible that you have a useful screen that you can read on, you can work on, right? So this is the tension. If your idea does resolve the tension, then that's a hint that it's a good idea, a worthy idea to follow up with. And what I also found to be important is if you ignore everybody else, does the idea contain something that is truly you? At the very beginning of my design career, I just tried to basically make my bosses happy, the client happy, try to come up with something that they told me, right, to do. And I neglected what I thought myself, what I felt about the things myself. And usually it's much harder to represent exactly what other people have in mind, because they communicate to you in such a way that there's some information is lost along the way. Then you transfer that into thinking, put it into an idea, and obviously all these stages lose more and more of the original idea that was mentioned by the other person in the first place. And that would also often lead to discussions. And at one point, my boss said, yeah, but what about you? Did you think about it? What do you think is a good idea? And that really opened up a new approach for me in design and was a really valuable lesson. Now I really try to also for myself, think for myself, understand things for myself, and state solutions and ideas that I truly find interesting because of the person I am as a designer, right? So if you can answer these questions positively, then you might be onto some really good improvements. But general tips to get there is to iterate through an idea. It's not just like you make it once and then it's done, but it evolves over time. With your understanding of the problem, the solution also improves. With your understanding of the proportion, everything evolves. So it's not, if you feel like you're onto something, but it's not yet answering some of these questions, you can still develop it further into a great idea. Then combine the best of multiple worlds. That's something I stated now in every other strategy, right? Combination is key. Take the best aspects of several ideas and combine them into one to get the mega conglomerate of super ideas. If you feel like the constraints are holding you back because they're so tight, try to remove all constraints at the beginning. That really gives you like the space to be really free, have all the freedom you need to come up with something nice, and add constraint by constraint, bit by bit, step by step, to sharpen the idea toward your final great idea, right? That way you get all the benefits from the open creative thinking, but you still consider the constraints after each other. And the last tip that I have to get there is get feedback. Try to get feedback early on from colleagues, but also from the user, from your client. Take that feedback seriously and improve on it. And when you do, then it's almost inevitable that the idea that you come up with adds value to the people where it matters most. All right. So this was my video on creative thinking, the ideation process. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there's some ideas and technique strategies for you that you can use to ideate creatively and come up with super amazing solutions for the next generation of products. Thank you very much.